Okay, we're going to get started again. Our director gave us a go. Okay, the hour being 7:39 p.m. on Monday, February 14th, 2022. I'd like to call to order the Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Bridget, can we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Conroy?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you, Bridget. The next item is continued discussion regarding potential vehicle leasing and replacement program agreement with Enterprise Fleet Management. Who's going to, Doug, you want to take the lead here? Take three.
Take three, you're correct. We had originally talked about this beginning with the 2022 budget workshop. We then moved on to the November 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting, and now we are hopefully at our last step at the Committee of the Whole meeting for February 14th. This is really a follow-up to a lot of the questions and concerns that were raised at that November 22nd meeting. It took us a while, and with some vacations involved, which is why it's kind of in February as opposed to being sooner. But just so you know, Matt DeLand from Enterprise is here again. He was one of the individuals that was out here in November. So we're just going to go down this list here. And this what's showing on the PowerPoint presentation at this point in time is the original list of vehicles that we had talked about replacing. So there's 15 of them. They're directed, or they're set up by individual department. There are 12, 13, 14, 15 public works. I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 9, 10, 11, 12 public works, 2 police, and 1 fire. So those were what we had originally talked about replacing. Can you switch the slides now? So after much discussion with staff, we decided that these 3 vehicles, which are vehicles numbers 12, 81, and 44, would come off of the list. These are the larger vehicles. These are the 2 dump trucks, and then the other one is a water truck that has to be outfitted for the water department to go and work on main breaks. So there's a lot of work involved in getting that truck ready or upfitting it for purchase by the village. So we looked at these 3 in particular, and because they were so expensive, and we hold on to these vehicles for such a long time, longer than what the lease term was. We usually hold on to these, according to Carl, 15 to 20 years, these 3 pieces of equipment, because they are larger and they are a little bit more expensive. They are a little bit more expensive, and they cost a little bit more to upfit. So after some discussion, we decided that we would remove these from the list and focus solely on the 3-year and the 5-year vehicle terms for the lease. So one of the questions that was asked was, what is the first year's payment going to be to Enterprise? So in this schedule here on the PowerPoint, the first column there, it shows the department, it shows the individual vehicles, the number of each vehicle from each department. And the bottom one, the surplus, means we're turning those in, but we're not going to be getting replacements for them. So we're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12 total cars that we're going to turn around. We're going to put on the market and get money back and then replace with a leased vehicle. So those annual lease payments for the ones that we're going to re-up for lease total $98,534. That's the cost of the lease for the first year. That's what we would be paying. The column that's marked one-time aftermarket cost B, that means those are the costs that we would have to put into the vehicle in order to meet department requirements, like a plow or a siren bar or whatever the case may be. Those are what we call the aftermarket costs. And the total aftermarket cost for those 12 vehicles is $95,000. So that's something that we would have to pay. The column C is actually what the proceeds would be when we take those cars that we're going to replace, when we put those out on the market, and then we would get the money back. We would have our choice of what we want to do with it, but we would plan on using those funds to cover the aftermarket cost. So the total cost for the first year payment is going to be column A, the lease costs, plus the upfit costs, less any trade-in value that we get, and that would give us our total payment upon delivery. So the total that we estimate being paid on the first year is $116,197. Right now we have in the general fund budget $117,500 worth of vehicles. That is exclusive of the dump trucks and the water truck. Those 3 vehicles are budgeted for. The 2 dump trucks are actually budgeted for in the general fund at I think it was $200 and some odd thousand. So Public Works can go ahead and purchase those on top of this amount here for the 116. The water truck is budgeted for, but it's budgeted for in the water fund, I determined. So that's our initial plan. That's our initial payment for the first year. All right. So this is a total annual cost under the lease for the 5 years, because we've got 4 vehicles that are 3-year term, and the rest are 5-year terms. So what I did was I spread out the cost over the 5-year period. So the first row is the total lease payment per year. The second row shows as the trade-in what we'll be getting back on the surplus. And then the third row is the upfitting costs, those costs that we need to get the cars back into department-ready condition. So the first year would cost $116,197, which we just talked about. And then the years 2 and 3 would be just the straight lease payments on every vehicle, 1 through 12, for the 3 years of lease payments. Year number 4 is when we make the first turnaround of those 3-year vehicles. Now, it's not, if we determine that it's not worthwhile going forward with that, we might not lease those cars again. We might just stop it at that point in time. We have the option of stopping it and turning around and purchasing the vehicles. This scenario assumes that we're going to go ahead and release those vehicles that their lease term ended after 3 years. So the total annual lease payments in year 4, when we start the new leases, is going to be $106,000. That assumes a jump in the lease rate of 7%. And then the trade-in, which we've talked about before, on the vehicles that we're putting back on the market, the first 3 for years number 1 through 3, and then the upfit cost for those other vehicles. And then year number 5 is the 5th year payment. So that was pretty much how the payments go for the 5 years. Really what I wanted to show, this was a question from Trustee Hendricks, and I agree to her point. What it shows is that over the 5 years, the costs are $100,000 in that area. So we would have probably funds available to purchase other vehicles, similar to what we're doing this first year, where we have an additional $400,000 budgeted for the large vehicles. So say we had to go out and replace the sewer vac, which is a more expensive truck. We would have funding available, given the scenario, to purchase that large piece of equipment. Okay, so on this slide here, these are the advantages overall. First of all, let me just say that the total lease cost that we had was about $527,000. If you go back to that previous slide, See that the total lease over the 5 years is $527,000. What I did was I went back and I looked at all of the vehicles that we would be purchasing and how much the purchase cost would be if we were just to buy all of these vehicles at one time or two times or whatever over the years. And that total, I'd come up with about $506,000. So leasing is a little bit more expensive. I'll say that, but the break-even point, it's so small because the difference is really $21,000 over a 5-year period. It's about $4,000 a year. So in my mind, that kind of makes it a break-even. Okay, so now we come to the advantages of the program. So part of our problem right now is the village has a lot of old equipment over in Public Works. By entering, this is one of the reasons why we started looking at Enterprise, was because we needed to replace a lot of our vehicles at one time. We're trying to find the most cost-effective way of doing it. And utilizing Enterprise Fleet Management, we could use $116,198 the first year, as opposed to buying all of these cars at one time, which would be $452,000. So that kind of helps us with cash flow. And at the point of getting those 12 new vehicles, we reduce the age of our fleet. As reported previously, over 53% of our fleet, I believe is what the number was, is 10 years. Yeah, 53% of our fleet is over 10 years old. So by reducing the age of the fleet, we also reduce the maintenance costs. That just goes hand in hand. And then one of the reasons that you want to work with a company like Enterprise is because they do this. This is their business. And so we would tap into their knowledge of when to buy a car, when to trade a car. And that would benefit the village as a whole by making things more efficient and more streamlined. So right now, those are what I believe were some of the questions and concerns of the board. I would like to answer some questions. Michael's here and Carl's here too, if there's anything you have directed towards us all.
Doug, what are the 3-year and the 5-year vehicles?
The 3-year vehicles are, I believe, 3 Ford F-150s, and the 5-year vehicles are the F-250s and the F-350s.
So the 2 police, those are 2 squad cars?
Yeah.
That are part of
Oh,
it?
yeah, that's right, and they're the 3 years also.
They beat the 3-year.
Yeah.
So separate from this and these 12 vehicles, I mean, pretty much each year we are purchasing squad cars, albeit 2 or 3.
Right.
We will still have the funding available to continue on with that because this
We
lease
would.
is only for 2 of them.
Right, and what I would do, I mean, we would sit down, before we even entered into a new lease agreement, we would have to come to the board. If we wanted to lease new police vehicles under this agreement here, we would still have to come to the board and talk to them about leasing those additional 2. Every time we lease a vehicle with Enterprise, we would need to come to the board and talk to you. But prior to that, we would talk with Mike, and we would see, okay, how did this work for you? Was it something that you want to continue on? So that's, I mean, it would be a discussion at staff level, and then we would have to bring it to the board. And it's all intertwined with the budget, because we would include this as part of the budget discussion.
But are we keeping up or getting enough of the squad cars that we would do separate from if we were going through a lease program?
Are we buying them right now, is what you're asking? I don't understand.
Right, I mean, so we only have 2 squads that are part of this program.
Right.
Next year, I mean, we have another 2 or 3 to purchase separate from leasing. So we are able to fund those going forward.
Yes, we should be able to. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to. If we could either do it by a lease, or we could do it with a purchase. Because our lease payments are only $98,000. That's the beauty of this, is the cash flow on a lease is only is under $100,000 for that second year. I would make the assumption, and we would have to look at the numbers, but I would make the assumption that we would continue on with the leasing program. But I don't know that for a fact. And if we did continue on with the leasing program, that would make the cost probably only about an additional $15,000 or more, depending on how many police cars we want to purchase.
But are these, my point is, if we weren't doing a lease and we were picking out the vehicles to purchase or replace this year, I'd venture to say that some of these would not be on that list, which is why we've got this aging fleet. Whereas we've tried to keep up with our police cars and
Right.
ambulances and all that. So I just want to make sure that if we're going about it this way, yes, we'll have some nice shiny public works vehicles that we might not otherwise felt we needed right away. I just want to make sure we're able to keep up on the
And the
squad car.
squad cars, and we should be able to, is what I'm saying.
And what about availability? We talked about this before. In terms of these, there would not be any problem getting the vehicles we want as part of this?
That's a question for Matt. I'm not really sure. He's wondering how the availability of the vehicles out on the market at this point in time.
Yeah, so it's ever fluctuating.
I'm sorry, if you could state your name for the record, please. I know Doug introduced you, but thank you.
Yeah, of course. Matt DeLand, County Executive with Enterprise Fleet Management.
Thank you.
Yep. So to answer your question, it fluctuates, unfortunately, from day to day. So in a normal year, we'd have 8 to 10 months to order vehicles, and sometimes it's been as long as a week before that order bank is open and closed. So the F-150s should be opening up soon for 2023. Some of those vehicles up there, like an Impala, most U.S. manufacturers not making sedans anymore, just not competitive. Yeah, so trade it out, right? So, yeah, it depends, but we track that really daily, honestly, and share that with our customers. So you guys would be made apprised of ordering timelines, delivery timelines, lead times for vehicles, all that, and then we put in a plan in place to make sure we're getting orders in.
Well, we're
But
not.
there's the fail-safe, we're not turning in a vehicle that needs to be replaced until we know that its replacement is available. We're not gonna be left.
We would not do that. We need to sit down and talk this over with Enterprise. Michael would have to talk to him. And before we even talked about putting a car out on the market, we need to make sure that there's one available to replace it.
And we're not just stuck with the car that nobody wanted, or the truck that nobody wanted. In other words, we wanted a Ford F-150 and all we got is something else.
Yeah, so to that point, I mean, if the Ford F-150, say the Ford F-150 is open for a week or two and then this order bank closes, what we would do is try to pivot to another manufacturer that's comparable. Realistically, these days, a Chevy, a Ford, a Ram, they're all pretty similar, especially if you're not worried about stocking parts and doing maintenance in-house and things like that. Most of the vehicles, new vehicles, don't run like old vehicles. They're pretty efficient. There's more technology into them. So swapping out a Ram 1500 for a Ford F-150, your folks aren't really going to be able to tell that much of a difference unless they really hate Ram products for some reason and have a personal vendetta against them, right? But I get that. Some people are loyal to some brands. But for the most part, we've had to do that with hundreds of customers this year where, we have a customer who needs 300, or they have 300 vehicles in their fleet. They need 100 GM vans or Chevy vans, and they're just not available, and say, well, we can order these Ram vans instead, right? And that's just kind of, it is what it is right now. There's a vehicle shortage, not much we can do about it, just advise our customers on what their options are and help them make the best decision, so.
Well, I think I mentioned at the last meeting, maybe it comes up more so with the police department and the squads, because we've seen there's been a difference over the years and which one seems to work out better, some of them fit better, some of them, the officers like better. So that's probably the more important part, on that end than on the F-150.
Correct.
But we'd have the same problem if we were trying to buy a Ford F-150, correct? I
Right.
mean, do you have any more or less access to the available Ford F-150s than if we decided not to go with Enterprise and wanted to go buy Ford F-150s ourselves? Are we more likely to get one through you or less likely to get one through you?
It depends. I mean, I would say less likely to try to do it on your own, just because we have more of a network. We're ordering direct from the manufacturers as much as we can, because it's going to be the most cost-effective way to do it. If you go out and just try to buy a vehicle from a dealer right now, you're obviously going to pay more than MSRP. We've seen anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 over MSRP over sticker, just because the dealers kind of have all the power right now. So that's a nightmare if you try to go out and just buy a vehicle from a dealer. So ordering direct is the best way to go. But to your point as well, I mean, I work with Village of Burr Ridge, Public Works and Police, and we did an analysis where we compared all the available police vehicles. And at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, that's great, but our officers aren't going to fit in that vehicle. So they actually end up going with Tahoes, and the resale value is so great on the Tahoes that the total cost of ownership and the cent per mile cost of a Tahoe versus an Interceptor versus a Charger, the Tahoe actually was the winner. So lowest cost of ownership, better fit for their people, It's an SUV, it's four-wheel drive. I mean, it worked out pretty well, so that's what they ended up going with. So that's something that we do every year, is do an analysis like that, bring you guys the information, to staff, and, lay out all the information. You guys have a few meetings a year to plan these things out, and then we execute the plan, so.
Does the lease term start upon delivery of the vehicle, not when the lease is signed?
Correct, yeah, upon delivery of the vehicle, correct.
Okay, so it's staggered. Your 3-year term is going to be staggered based on when all these different vehicles are delivered.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, again, something we'd keep you apprised of, obviously, as they're being built and being delivered and ready for pickup and going to the upfitters, getting lights and sirens and things like that put on, so.
I have a question then. So we're talking about, one of the benefits is the wholesale switch out, so we can get multiple vehicles. And I guess this is a question for Doug more than anything. With newer vehicles, our insurance, right? And a wholesale switch out when you go from older to newer does increase insurance because of all the new electronics and technology in the vehicle. Do we know what that impact is? For a 10 vehicle switch out?
Our insurance is actually covered through intergovernmental,
Right.
through IRMA. And
Right.
IRMA gives us, overall, it's not going to have a big effect, only because of the way the contribution is determined on an annual basis.
Okay.
Their property that they look at isn't down to the car level, it's to the larger level. They assume we're always going to have these vehicles, so that's just part of the contribution. So it should have a minimal impact by doing the change out all the time. I mean, I don't think
So
it'll
it's
have
not,
any impact.
it's not a problem at
No,
that
it's not a
point.
concern.
Then my other question would probably be for the chief. We've talked before about the police cruisers and police vehicles, and we have discussed, during the budget meeting, we discussed this as well, that Chargers, sedans aren't necessarily a good fit for our police department. We have enclosed, we don't do high-speed pursuits because of the way our nature or our area is. And then getting arrested, perpetrators put it in the back of a Charger as compared to a back of a Tahoe is a difference also as well, and the combined and the safety of our officers during that time frame. Are we talking about still getting sedans then? Because I thought we were going to go more with a four-wheel drive SUV types as opposed to doing sedans.
Much like, excuse me, much like they've been describing, we've also kind of been subject to availability. I would say that our top priority for, as you mentioned, the way we drive within town is all-wheel drive. That's what we typically look for. So it's manageable to have something of a blend of sedans and SUVs. We have 2 patrol Chargers right now, and the rest are Durangos. I'll be honest, Tahoes are great, but for us at least, because of some of our narrower streets, it's a little easier to navigate with a Durango, although I don't think that the size difference is all that different. Just from when I poll my staff, they've typically preferred either the Interceptor Ford Explorer equivalent or the Durango. So those are the ones that we tend to, favor. However, depending on, the year and for what I have availability for costs, that's when we've gone for the sedans. But in those situations, our top priority is all-wheel drive in either variation.
Regardless. Okay.
Yep.
And then there's 4 vehicles on the other side of that antenna, police vehicles on the other side of the antenna that are still snowed in. And that snow came down weeks ago. I mean, are those dead? Are those not usable? I don't,
Those are going to be part of.
surplus vehicles that show up on the listing over here.
okay, so those are going away. That's why they're still snowed in.
Right.
All right.
They're not actively used in our fleet.
Well, they're not because they're still snowed in. I was just, that's what I was asking. I was like,
No,
what are we
sir.
doing with those then? Okay. All right.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
Just one thing, to Chief's comments, thank you, and I guess that was the point that I was trying to make, and to staff on this, I mean, there could very well be some settling that we have to do where we don't get exactly what we want. So for Carl too, I mean, just something that we have to know going forward, that's part of this.
Yeah, so we did talk about that. That's not something that we did not discuss. And Carl and Michael, I believe, Chief and Department Head are both very comfortable with what Enterprise has just discussed. They know the bans on these, on this leasing arrangement. And I think they're both really ready to go with it, so. But yes, they're aware of the situations and what they can and cannot do.
Okay.
Okay, this is a big initiative brought forward by staff. I mean, this is something new, when it was first brought forward, I'll admit, when I talked to Tim about it, it was a big change of action for us, so I think we worked our way through this with several committee sessions and a lot of legwork by staff and presentations, so, we'll put this up in 2 weeks for the board to, Doug's available, everyone's available, if you have any questions or comments, but we have to decide if we want to move forward this or not. It's a major shift in the way we've done things. It seems to make sense. From a standpoint, we have strong staff recommendations on it, but let's give the board 2 weeks to digest it, and we'll put it up for a vote in 2 weeks. Okay? All right, thank you very much. Thank you for being here tonight. I might use some discretion here, presidential discretion, and bouncing around. Is there anyone here that's wants to comment on the 9132 47th Street issue? Okay, so what I'd like to do at this point, I'd like to go to item number 4, which is the economic development plan, because I know there's several members of the chamber here tonight that probably are here to think about or comment on that.
I think that the petitioner is here.
Oh, on the 47th Street one?
Yes.
Oh, they are, okay, that's what I was saying, okay. So, okay, then I'll go ahead and do that, then I'm gonna go to the economic development plan. So, I'll just stick with agenda item number 2 for now. Discussion of a special use permit for commercial vehicle repair and maintenance use at 9132 West 47th Street. Emily, would you like to present?
Thank you, President Garvey. This is a request for a special use permit for commercial vehicle repair and maintenance. This is an aerial view just to get an understanding of where this request would take place. And this is an aerial view with the zoning. This is zoned I-1 with B multifamily directly north of it. This is an image of the site. On the right-hand side is an updated image. They did make some minor improvements to the property and take down that metal skeleton structure. So this request was reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission at a public hearing on January 27th, 2020. The applicant, who is here tonight, and the applicant's attorney presented and provided testimony. There were no public members in the audience that night, and the Planning and Zoning Commission did vote unanimously to recommend approval of this request. And as I mentioned, the applicant and the attorney, they are here tonight if there are any questions, but that's all I have for this.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from the board about this?
Just one comment, is there another application that's part of this?
There should just be one application.
And it's blank.
We do have a hard copy here.
Okay.
There is a hard copy on the website, perhaps in a different section of the website.
Okay.
I'm happy to give you this hard copy if you'd like to take a look.
Okay, but I'm not missing it in the package here, right? I mean, the one that's here is blank.
Is that for tonight's agenda? I know if you are at the Planning and Zoning Commission section of the website, that application, at least when I viewed it multiple times, the latest was just today.
It takes a long time to load, but it's there.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, you should have it there, trustee Ketchmark.
But I also have a hard copy if that's easier.
Yeah, mine's not blank.
Yeah, that's, I see what you're saying.
Did you pay your village board agenda fee to get the pack?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just a problem with yours loading, or if you saved it when you downloaded it before it, but the application, special use application that I have in our packet.
I read the rest of the packet. I don't have any issue with it. I just didn't know if I was missing that because the rest of the packet is all here.
It is here.
Okay,
Yeah, it does take a second to load, so it took mine.
okay. All right, is there any other questions or comments on the board, or does anyone need or want to hear from the applicant at this point? We have a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission, a unanimous recommendation. There was no members of the public in attendance, and as usual, we have a very detailed staff report and the benefit of the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
I have no problems with this at all.
Okay, hearing no other questions or concerns, we'll put this up for a vote in 2 weeks. And we can, let the applicant know. You don't have to be here. We'll vote on this in 2 weeks, and staff, you're welcome to be here as we vote on it at the committee, or the board meeting of February 28th about the 6:30 agenda, and staff will let you know the results. You're welcome to be here if you'd like. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, former trustee Oberhauser and Derek might give me evil eyes here, but I am going to ask if we could deal with the presentation related to the economic development plan from Cindy, because I do believe there's members of the chamber here that, as we know, are business owners that have had very long days. Not that Derek and Brian haven't, but I'd like to address that because I think there's more people here to talk about that. And just from a standpoint of how proceeding tonight, I'd like to have the presentation tonight, and knowing that this will be a future topic going forward. We're not asking for necessarily board decision or board direction. We may committee this or have a special board meeting on this topic going forward. But Cindy worked very hard on this presentation, and I think it's a good starting point. So if we can go to that item, presentation and discussion of a recommended 3-year economic development plan.
And maybe as Cindy's walking up, I'll just say a few preparatory words. As the board is aware, several months ago in 2021, the board met Cindy Kalima. She is our part-time economic development coordinator. Cindy comes to us through GovHR, our temporary staffing resource that we've used several times for various positions. Cindy has been the executive director of the City of Lisle Economic Development Corporation. She's worked in marketing and economic development in Downers Grove. She was the chief communications officer of the Illinois Tollway Authority, and she was the marketing manager of the village of Hinsdale. So she has experience in dealing with these types of issues that we're dealing with. As I presented to the board when I introduced Cindy, one of my challenges with the village since I've been here is I often feel like I'm shooting at butterflies where, well, there's a good idea, let's try that. Well, there's an idea over there, let's go try that one. And there has been very little, whether it be my fault or we've had kind of a revolving door of community development directors, there's been no one person or one party that would ever oversee the implementation of all these. We always have some ideas. I've come to you with mottos and logos and branding ideas, and it's hard because there's no person and no position in the village, including myself, that's been solely responsible for trying to execute our various great ideas that we hear. So Cindy is one person that I became aware of. I met her and interviewed her, and I was impressed by her. The village board was as well. I don't want to speak for the village board, but the village board okayed it. And so Cindy's been kind of working oftentimes in the background, not very many hours a week, but I'm doing some working generally with Emily in the community development department, doing business owner outreach. She's done community stakeholder surveys. She's done a lot of review of past efforts of the village, current efforts of the village, to try to encourage economic development. And so she comes to us tonight with this economic development plan that was in your packet. She is going to present it. So she comes to this moment with a lot of experience in doing these type of things. And as Trustee Garvey said at the outset, and I agree with, we're not looking, we can start the discussion this evening, get initial comments. We can come back to a future meetings, plural, and have further discussion as we explore economic development. There is no one piece of tool in the toolbox that's going to achieve economic development, but it's a series of things. And I'll shut up and let Cindy walk herself through the plan.
Well, I'm going to just skip some of my opening comments because Tim just teed
Sorry.
it up for me. No, that's okay. But I do want to say thank you for the opportunity to work with all of you on this project. I think one of the things that came out of all the interviews and kind of doing deep dives into your documents and really getting to know the community better is that you really have an incredibly engaged community who's proud of Brookfield and wants to be supportive and is encouraged by efforts. And I know Tim and others expressed a lot of concern about some of the activities not necessarily being successful or feeling like there was not a lot of collaboration. You know, this is our chance to pull those things together and to do something that's new and creative and really give our business community an opportunity to feel supported and then also attract new businesses to the community as the community as a whole gets elevated. So I'll keep this kind of concise because you've had the report in front of you. You've had an opportunity, hopefully, to review it. I want to make sure I allow enough time to have some general conversations and address your questions. But the important piece to remember here is this is a living, breathing document. It's not intended to give us one plan that we're going to stick to for the next 3 years. It's intended to be evaluated. It's a guide. It's something that will allow staff and leadership to kind of help stay focused. I heard lots of comments about often things are siloed, there's a lack of communication or coordinated communication, the need for stronger brand identity, the need for the ability to share information beyond the community, but most importantly, I think what I heard not only from businesses, but developers and people in the region is that Brookfield's a great community, but nobody really knows you're here, except for the zoo. And it's not for lack of trying, it's just consistent trying. And a consistent messaging and maximizing your social media and the websites and newsletters and direct communication with your businesses, because basically your internal circle of support is going to come from your commissions, your staff, your businesses, and the residents. And if we're going to expand this to anybody beyond the community, we really have to engage all those entities. And you have great resources here, like the Chamber and others that are willing to be involved. And this is an opportunity to engage that conversation and say, how do you want to be involved? Here's our vision. Now, how do you want to be part of that? I think the key pieces here that I want to focus on is that this is where we're looking at a business. We want to make sure we're promoting a business-friendly environment, build relations, strengthen relationships so there's two-way conversation between businesses and the village, elevate the community as a whole, not only to the region, but to the state, to the country, so that we're actually a player. Right now, because there's not a lot of the base needs, we don't have a way to even compete in the environment and when it comes to economic development. So what this is going to do is help us identify ways to stabilize our existing businesses, attract new, diversify the tax base, and then really promote the quality of life. We're going to talk about ways that we can engage stakeholders to be more involved in Brookfield. We're going to encourage collaboration and efforts to maximize the unique assets that the community has. Address siloed efforts, bridge those communication gaps that everybody is feeling, and support and maximize these existing programs. I think this is a really key piece that can get overlooked. It's not necessarily going out there to initially create new programs and services, but really what's out there and how can we maximize those and engage everyone in that process. So it's not just the village doing it, it's actually a two-way opportunity for people to help support that endeavor and really find ways to elevate that communication. The first goal that we've talked about is really kind of the baseline. This is where we need to reset and start looking at creative ways to address the needs by establishing a point of contact for our business community, for helping them to understand where the conversation starts, and that it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to feel like they can't have an honest and forthcoming conversation, that there's, that there would be retaliation or something like that. This is a positive opportunity for everybody to work together. So we want to reset, and we want to really make sure that we've got key people involved and everybody knows who they are. The second piece of this that's really important is ongoing collaboration. That conversation I keep talking about is two-way. People have to understand and businesses have to feel like there's opportunities for them to communicate with the village, and in return, the village is sharing information that is important to their success. That's resources that they may not be aware of. Most of them are doing the best they can just to keep their doors open and make sure they have customers that are happy and fulfilled. And if we're going to be a resource, it's on the village to help disseminate information that is going to impact that and allow them to be successful. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here, besides kind of the communication, is initially at least, is to look at maybe ways to create that synergy between the public and the village. And one of those that has worked in the past for me on a lot of occasions, and while this is what I'm putting forth to you, best case for every economic development effort, is how do you get those, how do you get the resources coming in and the information coming in and getting it out? One of the best ways to do that is through a commission or committee, which is what I'm suggesting taking a look at. Again, you have very good beautification and conservation commissions. Let's utilize them. Let's get them informed. Let's give them an opportunity to be part of the process. What they're doing right now impacts the community, and that is what people in new businesses are looking for, new employers are looking for, residents are looking for, and what we need to do is maximize those efforts, to work together and find ways to elevate what they're doing and use it as an asset and part of our toolbox. Again, I want to keep this high level. I don't want to go too deep. And we want to look at some other programs that allows businesses to participate in and support and benefits their participation. I had a conversation with a business the other day. She was not aware of what she could even ask the village for, or what she could ask about. There was some programs the state is rolling out that she had no idea was available potentially for her. And just knowing that the village could be that asset, that resource, was a positive for her, and actually elevated how she felt about the village. The important piece here is that none of this can be done in a silo. We need to be doing this together, so we're going to need the commissions or the chamber and others like them to work with us to make sure that we're getting this information out to the over 200 businesses that are in this community. Which brings me probably to one of the basics, is that there's not a lot of resources, coordinated resources, that have been developed for economic development. No fault of anyone's, it's just hard to keep up. And if it's not your primary job, it's not going to get done. And so really looking at building a database that we can use to communicate with the business community, that can be segmented, so that if we have a message that needs to go to restaurants because there's some funding or there's an opportunity, or outdoor dining, we're talking just to them. We're not talking to everybody. And oftentimes, because it can be, when it's segmented, we allow for more responses and the ability to concentrate specifically on those businesses, and they don't get lost in the noise of all the other communication that's going on. So we really need to kind of reset and go back to the beginning and build up some of the assets that we need to support our businesses. And that's really goes back to an individual's focusing on a database, available properties, the ability to work with brokers and developers on what's available and what would we be interested in having in a location. So it's those kinds of things that these a commission might do, or the chamber, or other opportunities further down the road. It can be looking at a downtown association, partnerships. Those are all things that can be done in the future, but really we need to start with the basics. And so this is goal number one, is starting from those basics and trying to identify those individuals who can take leads and be part of this, kind of kicking this off. The second goal is really about attraction and retention. That's your meat and potatoes of economic development. And everything that was under this goal, whether it was looking at the business license and does it have the information we need Do we need to add information? We've actually looked at it already and made some adjustments that will affect our ability to communicate with our businesses. It's looking at planning and zoning and, is it flexible? Is it diverse? Are there things that we could do to make the process go better or more smoothly? What's the take from the business community on the process, and how can we better support them through that process? It's collecting information on the well-being of businesses in general, and I think this is a big one when we talk about communication, is understanding what are their obstacles, what are their barriers to doing business or being successful, and how can we identify those things and collect that information and have that conversation so that we're not surprised if someone decides they need to close. We're actually able to know ahead of time what's going on in their world and potentially help them maintain their business and be a success in Brookfield. Nobody wants empty storefronts. Nobody wants buildings with empty windows. The only way we can prevent that, or even work to move that forward so that they are full, is to actually build a relationship with our existing businesses, celebrate their successes, and provide them resources so that they can be successful. So those are the kinds of things that we're really looking for: retention and attraction. A lot of this is just letting people know what great assets that Brookfield has and what makes this community different and why it would be important to invest in this community. And those aren't things you can pull together when somebody calls. They have to be available. They have to be prepared. And they have to be flexible enough so that people can go on at 10 o'clock at night and find them on your website or find them in the social media. Be able to contact somebody who's already a business here, who has already said that they would be supportive and provide insight, a mentor, even partner with them in an effort to make sure that they're a success. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking for when I talk about goal number 2, that really helps attract business because they have a support system and we are making it easy for them to come here. And then goal number 3, this one is really about maximizing the communication between the chamber, the library, churches, whether you're a cyclist or it's another nonprofit, and the village, and how can we pull the zoo, how can we pull that information together in one place and utilize all of our capabilities to get that message out beyond this community so that we're driving people here, not just visitors, but we're driving business here. And the only way to do that is if we can do it together. So it's going to take all the parties working together and identifying how they want to be involved to help promote that, but having a coordinated effort when it comes to marketing and communications that people can rely on, that it's not a website that falls flat. There's an opportunity for it to be fulfilled on a regular basis with current information. The community calendar is one of those things that we've already identified. We want to spend more time building up the businesses that are participating in filling that, and the associations and nonprofits that are around the community, and use them to fill that space as well. And then start driving traffic there. We're already investing in it, in marketing it. We need to take advantage of it now. So very high level, those are kind of the big pieces of what's in this plan. And again, this is evolving, and the intent is that it would be evaluated in a year, maybe even sooner, but definitely within a year, to make sure we're headed in the right direction. If we see some trends, we can adjust. We will have an action plan that is associated to this that will help, again, help staff stay in focus, stay on kind of a task, and then it's easy for us to track. We can say, here's where we're at, because we have a plan that we can follow that's got action steps. Excuse me. I think that's kind of my overview. Is there specific questions I can answer or provide? more detail?
I just want to, the format is wonderful. It's, it was a lot of reading, and I read it through once, but it's going to take more than one read to totally digest it. But I mean, the format and the way you laid it out in terms of the goals. I mean, I think the 3 goals that you presented are things that we've always kind of maybe known but weren't able to articulate, but then the action steps under each thing and the suggested timelines and things. I think those are tremendous help to get them written down and in front of us. I obviously, as you said, it's a living, breathing document. Those may change with input and from the board and the community, but I think you've given us a great starting point. And as I indicated earlier tonight, I told the board, this isn't something I just want everyone to give a thumbs up to tonight and let's move on. I want to have the chance the board to digest it, get input from the public a little bit. And this is such a key, important topic that it might justify its own standalone meeting, or I might suggest I'll get feedback from the board and maybe put it on a committee of the whole meeting when we don't have a lot of other topics where we could really dedicate a lot of time to it. And maybe the timing of that with the Energize Ogden report coming back in the next couple of weeks, maybe those things together can be put into play. But I just want to thank you for the format, the documentation, the level of detail that you put into this. So
Well, I apologize if I went too light. I just want to be respectful of your time. And I think I've said this, if the conversation doesn't end, obviously, tonight, the intent is it grows and evolves from here. And the only way we can do that is if we keep talking about it.
I agree. And you did not go too light. I mean, the document is excellent. And there's just so much here to digest. So I want to open up to the board if there's any questions or comments, knowing that we're going to go forward with this and have, depending on your pleasure, whether it's a committee of the whole or a special committee related to this. And then I'd like to get input from any members of the audience or chamber that are here tonight. So, and does the board have any questions or comments at this point?
I just wanted to add that I think the immediate actions and the first 6 months and then a year from now, that helped me really digest it and see where to start and where to go, so that it didn't seem too overwhelming all at once. I really appreciate it, and I also think the piece about calling out all the different partners along the side, where this isn't just one staff person's job, it's all of these people and all of these different folks have a piece to contribute to each portion of the plan. I did give a foreshadow to the Beautification Commission last week when we met. They were really excited to see themselves even mentioned in it, and to be part of that moving forward. And so they're really excited to invite you guys to a meeting and talk about that further and how they can be more involved in the execution of this, and just really positive feedback. Not having seen it yet, but maybe they're
Right.
watching from home.
Great.
But yes, just thank you, and thanks for all of staff's work on this.
Anyone else? Trustee Conroy?
Yeah, just real quick, I know we're kind of painting in broad strokes here and overarching goals or overall goals. I mean, what type of, when I look at this, I'm like, and I look at Emily, and I'm like, well, there's a lot here, and then there's Emily. So, I mean, what is your anticipated need from a staff headcount to be able to approach being able to meet this?
It was intended to utilize the existing staff and honor their time, but to support it with other resources, whether it's involvement from other associations, the chamber, community members. One of the driving forces for the desire for a commission or a committee, Economic Development Commission or committee, was to provide some support that would give staff some relief in what
Okay.
is needed.
And that commission or committee, how would you see that differentiate, or how would you differentiate that from the current Chamber of Commerce that we have?
Well, first of all, they'd be invited to be participating in it. The intent is to have residents involved as well, other nonprofits, the business leaders. It's a forum for them to brainstorm, come up with ideas and strategies that are executable, and then a commitment from those individuals to help get that off the ground. It's not just it's not just a conversation. It's looking for people who want to put their time and effort into helping execute it. So it's not intended to be separate. It's kind of an overreaching vision for economic development.
And if I could just make a comment on that, in my previous position, I spent many years being part of an economic development commission, and to compare and contrast that to like a chamber of commerce, they're completely different missions. An economic development commission, for instance, would provide policy recommendations on TIF districts, on the PIP program, on all kinds of business and attraction from a village standpoint, whereas the Brookfield Chamber of Commerce tends to be more focused on, as we just had a meeting a week or so ago, on special events, and they have a little more perhaps focused mission, whereas an economic development commission really has overall village goals in mind, and policies and practices. So get involved in discussions and decisions, and making they don't make any policy decisions on their own. They're recommendatory to a village board, but for instance, in my experience, they would come to the village board recommending if there was a TIF district need or something, and that's not something that I've seen our Chamber of Commerce here being involved in, but it's a more kind of maybe 30,000-foot perspective versus a on the grounds in the boots, which is kind of the Chamber of Commerce.
But as we've talked, myself and Tim have talked, because his experience with these prior commissions, I asked the similar question about the distinction, and I mean, my conversations with you, the chamber is evolving and has evolving, and maybe doesn't want to focus so much on just events or things like this, but I see them as a partner going forward, and a key component, if there's a commission or a committee, there would definitely be representation on that, and the focus of the chamber. I mean, that's why it's a breathing, evolving document, and getting input and seeing what type of contribution the chamber and the chamber board can give to a commission going forward, I think would be key. So.
Okay. It just helps me articulate that to the chamber, because I'm sure I'll be getting
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, and I think the big piece also is that we're hoping there's going to be some efforts made for specific property development, or maybe taking corridors by sections and saying, okay, what can we do here? And then helping to kind of not only brainstorm and bring you ideas or needs, but also have those people work to get that message out into the community in a well-informed way, so that people understand it's well thought out, there's a plan, there's intention, and it's going to take everybody to kind of speaking to the same talking points to be able to do that.
Cindy, I wanted to thank you for bringing this together. There is so much here. We talked on the phone quite a bit initially. There could be a dozen items here that would be separate committee items almost to have a discussion on. Because I don't want to see us, 2 weeks we put this plan up for a vote and we vote the plan. We would not be ready there's too much that would go into this, too much detail, too much separate items that would have to have discussion. And as President Garvey mentioned, maybe that is something for future committee meetings or a separate workshop type thing. You mentioned, some of the things, or maybe Tim even mentioned some of the things we have done before that didn't work out. Times change, conditions change. Maybe we didn't get the message out there right. One of the things we did try to do 20 years ago was the separate Economic Development Corporation. That didn't work out. And there's a lot of reasons, and that would be a pretty large topic. But one of the things I think I saw with that is we thought we could start that commission or organization and kind of subcontract out economic development. And the village, with our limited staff, would have to deal with it. That doesn't work for a lot of reasons. So that might, if we're looking at something like that, or maybe more so commission, those are items that, and how we structure them and what's expected of them and how we work together, those are topics that take some time to figure out, because we do have limited staff. Just, the thoughts.
And by no means am I suggesting it's the only solution. I do know about the past. It would not be something I would recommend right now for Brookfield anyway, a separate third public-private entity. One, because you have to have large enough businesses who will help support the endeavors. And that's the key to a public-private partnership. And what I've said to Emily multiple times is we really need to kind of reset and really get the base built out and get the basics taken care of so people have resources to use. And there is information for people to share. It's really hard to do that right now because it's in so many different places and it's in a lot of different hands, and it's just not pulled together in a way that could be meaningful and could be packaged up and used. And so the commission is intended to be something, or committee, whatever is chosen, is intended to have lots of different stakeholders involved so that people understand what's happening and they're involved and they can choose how they want to be involved. And that's where we're going to build from. You got to start from the ground up, and we got to start with our core people, the people who are really the most passionate, and get that excitement developed and generated. And then we can kind of move beyond that. And we're just not there yet.
Other questions, comments on the board? Okay. We have several members of the chamber and other organizations here tonight. Would anyone like to comment or come forward or say, knowing that there'll be future opportunities, but I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Doug, would you like to say something?
Well, I think,
Doug, if I could just ask you, if you could please come up to the microphone, and could you just state your name for the recording? You're on TV now.
my name is Doug Fiala, and I'm with the Chamber of Commerce. And I really feel that the Chamber is trying to fade away from running events. We saw a hole in our community, so we set up a bunch of events. We've been running them pretty efficiently, and it brings our community together. But that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be bringing our business together. So I think we do have to kind of start leading towards to be a bridge between, and a crossable bridge between Brookfield and the Chamber of Commerce. A lot of people look at the Chamber and say they actually think it is Brookfield. Why are we at the street dance and paying for beer? Our taxes should be covering this. We hear that all the time. But we're actually out there having fun and bringing the community together. Farmers market, street dance, egg hunt. But I think we should be more of an educational entity between businesses to come to us, to come to you. And I think it would be a good way to go. So our events, I don't know if we'll be able to do that without the help of Brookfield or together with Brookfield. So that's, I think, what I have to say.
Thank you, Doug. And in my conversations with Trustee Conroy, knowing your organization, I mean, we know how labor-intensive these events are and how much volunteer time and work goes into it and to make it happen. Going forward, we'll look and, we're trying to, with staff here, see what events we can do and how we could partnership better going forward. But I also understand your idea about, possibly, serving a different role in terms of educating your businesses, helping your business being a conduit to the village. I think that's something in designing, whether a committee or commission or what we have going forward, your organization will play a key role in it. And that's the kind of the input that we're going to need going forward. So, Cindy, did you want to say something?
I think important to remember is simply that it's up to, especially the chamber, to figure out what they would like to be participating in and how they want to be involved. And we're starting from the base, so there's a lot of ability to do that. And that's the whole point of kind of starting from ground up.
Yeah. The way you described it as a reset, I think, is important. I mean, we want these events and things to happen, and some of these things will continue to happen, but we got to make sure they do happen in, possibly in different ways, or, transition them into different organization. I mean, the farmers market is a, key example. I mean, that's so volunteer and labor intensive, and, with the assistance of staff, we, try and make things happen, but there would be a big absence if that didn't happen. So we got to see how we can make those things go forward, but also allow, the chamber members as business owners also have their individual businesses and larger picture items to look at. So this is, like I said, I think a reset is a good word going forward in the coming months, how we define the roles of the different groups and what we could do to kind of take the best of what's happening now, but yet build that structure going forward, so. Okay. Anyone else? Chris? Is that Chris?
Evening, everyone. Chris Valdez, Cycle Brookfield. Happy to see that we're invited to participate in the Economic Development Plan. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we have been around in the area for a few years now, trying to grow the cycling infrastructure around town, not just for my own personal use of the streets, but really for the embetterment of the residents and so forth. Obviously, there's some safety implications that come from it, but there's some recreation and I believe some economy that can come from it as well. So I just want to say I'm in support of it. We are in support of it. We're happy to be at the table. We're happy to be a resource for the village, and whatever, if it's a commission or committee that comes out, please leverage us. Please leverage our volunteer expertise that we have, the manpower, boots on the ground, wheels on the ground. We can be mobile, get out there and really support whatever we can. So I just want to say I'm excited to do it, and I'm happy to be involved as well.
Thank you for your offer, and I think I could speak for the board. We were counting on you to be involved. You've been a key part quickly already, and very well known. Funny, at the breakfast the other morning with the local towns, I mean, Cycle Brookfield's very well known in terms of the other towns and what we're known for, and that's a big part because of you, so.
Well, I appreciate it. I had a great conversation with SRAM, is a large bike manufacturer this morning. They're looking to incorporate the other villages and kind of leverage what we're doing here in Brookfield to be the conduit and really sort of the pinnacle point of how other villages can grow sort of economy via bikes and so forth. So happy to, again, leverage the information I'm volunteering my time to do, present it to the board and to the village, and hopefully everyone can leverage that for a growth and economic turn. So
You'll definitely have a
yeah.
place at future meetings, and we'll let them know. I mean, it's like tonight was kind of the presentation, but I could see this is, as trustee Ketchner, there's a lot to digest here, and there's individual items that could be meetings in and of themselves, but you know, we can't be daunted because there's so much to do. We just got to take the initial steps. And Cindy's plan actually gives us the action items in the 6 to 12 month period and going forward. So we are all impatient, board members, staff members, residents, but there's a plan here to move forward. And we just got to make sure, keep going back to that. Cindy's point was very well taken. For any of this stuff to work, we got to establish the right base and the right organization and then take the steps going forward. I think in the past, we were so anxious to get in and get individual projects or items or events done that we didn't build the base properly or the organization properly, and that's why this document is so exciting, so.
Well, like I said, excited to be involved, excited to be brought to the table. Please leverage whatever we can do, and President Garvey will see you out on a bike over the spring at one of our events.
I really
right?
hope
Yeah.
I can.
I'm just kidding. Everyone's welcome, so yeah, please do. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
very much, Chris. Anyone else? Chuck?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Charles Hitzman, or most people call me Chuck when
Sorry.
they call, or Brian's got a few other choice words for me, but everything you said here is fantastic. We just had a chamber meeting this afternoon. Would I love to see somebody who takes this plan and runs with it immediately? Yes. I would also like to make sure that everybody here has a notion of what President Garvey just had to say. Let's hit a reset button. Ms. Clement, how long have you been working on this to present this at this point in time? 6 months. In that 6 months,
Hey, Chuck, if I could just ask you, could you speak into the microphone, even though
Sure.
Cindy won't mind if you're not looking, because there's
Sure.
people hopefully listening and watching, that the microphone is
The
muted.
question was, how long has this been worked on? And you said about 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, the interviews and getting to know the community, but then we've also been starting on some of the projects.
So in that 6 months, have you attended a chamber meeting yet?
Yes.
And was that a board meeting or a regular meeting, or? Okay. And in those 6 months, about how many businesses have you gotten to know or visit, or who have you talked to?
Several dozen,
Couple?
couple dozen, I'm trying to do the math in my head. real
Sure,
quick,
just
but
name
yeah.
off a few.
Mary's Morning Mix-Up, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The Candy Shop, I just met with Wendy and the bakery, Sue Bakery. I met with Irish Times, I'm sorry.
It's Chuck, what, is there, I mean, she
I'm
can go
just-
get a list of who
I'm
she
just-
met with, but I know personally she's met with several dozen
Okay.
business owners, so.
So I'm just saying here, on a reset level, we have a chamber board meeting where it's kind of felt like you hit the button 1,000 times, and I'm exaggerating by a factor of 10, but communications. We need to have communications. There's a massive breakdown. That's a key point. When you have active, dedicated people in town who feel like they're getting left out in the back seat, those communications break down even harder. So that's all I'm really trying to say is let's hit a reset button. I stood in this room 10 feet forward there yesterday and said how great of a relationship it would be and symbiotic to this community if we had a good relationship between the chamber and the village, and how beneficial it would be for the residents of the community. I think we need to work on that. There is some strong friction there. So I'm here, we want to work on stuff, but we got to have that interaction and so forth. While I love to have the village have a dedicated paid official to go through all that, I'd be in favor of that tonight. So thank you very much, and let's keep those communications rolling.
We will. Okay, and communicate, I agree, and Trustee Conroy, we've talked about this. I mean, communication's a two-way street, and I think there is communication. It can be better both ways, and that's something that we're going to work going forward on, so thank you. Anybody else? Brian?
Brian Oberhauser, Chairman of the Parks and Recreation Commission, and also former trustee. So I'm very excited by this presentation for a couple things. With regard to the chamber, I've been so happy over the past 15 years with all the events that have been put on, all the volunteer hours that go into it, how it really does bring the community together. Ideally, it also helps to promote businesses in town, but then always have been concerned that at some point the chamber might choose to then take a different approach. And so I would just like to point out, as you probably all know, that we have a fantastic rec director in Stevie Ferrari, who can, I think, if there is a transition, definitely handle things. And already every year she keeps coming up with new ideas and new things to be done. So I think that that's something that, if it does happen, that the village now can then transition to then focusing more on recreation, and the chamber could focus more on promoting business. And at the same time, these are a bunch of ideas that were, I was talking with CP a moment ago, have been floating around forever. And I know that in the past, in the hall, there were some staff members, high-level staff members, who would basically shoot down any of these as not actually being promoting business or sound ideas. So I'm glad there's new leadership in the hall and getting great advice from the outside, because these are the things that I think a lot of communities have done. And unfortunately, we haven't, and now this might be really a chance to really move forward. So thank you for supporting this plan.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else want to comment on the economic development plan or proposed economic development plan? Okay. Cindy, thank you very much for all the time. And this obviously is not the end, it's just the beginning, because myself and staff and the board are going to talk about how and what the next step is, whether we come back and go goal by goal, action plan by action plan before we adopt this. I mean, I think there might, I know you're open to input, and, maybe have a meeting where chamber and other organizations where we discuss this again at a specific dedicated meeting, I think might be the good idea, so. Would you like to add anything in closing, Cindy?
I just like to thank you for the opportunity. It's a great community. I'm excited to be working with you. And I think if we can all kind of, not to overuse the word, reset, we can do a lot of really great things together. We just need to do it together. I think that's the key piece.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I really appreciate all your time and effort.
Thank you.
It's exciting. We'll be back. Okay, now I will go back to the agenda discussion concerning the options for Grant Avenue widening on the 2022 street improvement project. Tim, or?
Yeah, I'll just say a few preparatory words. At the last committee of the whole meeting, staff in the form of the village engineer and the public works director came forward with a recommendation to Grant Avenue, for a variety of reasons, is slated to be improved this year. And so we took a kind of wider view of this and saying, well, we could do the quite honestly, the easiest thing, and that's just resurface what's there and put it back again. But Derek, the village engineer, did what he's supposed to do and said, well, we might want to take this opportunity and and look at ways that we can improve Grant Avenue, not only for today, but for tomorrow and the next decade, bearing in mind that we probably won't, I don't know when the last time Grant Avenue has been improved, 30 or 40 years ago. So we're looking at not only today and tomorrow, but maybe out to the year 2050 or 2060. And so one of the things we talked about is potentially widening the street, which I understand does involve, there's some negative implications of that, but that's what happens generally when you change anything, that there are some implications. The board had good discussion. The board requested that we have a public meeting specifically to invite those that would be most impacted by anything we do on Grant Avenue to come to that meeting. We did so on February 9th. We held a virtual. We did not think, not knowing how many people were going to show up, it didn't seem wise to have a wide open forum. We sent out 43 notices to individuals that either live on Grant Avenue or in any way, shape, or form their property abuts up to Grant Avenue from Grand all the way to Forest. 43 notices were sent out. At our meeting, a virtual meeting, one individual showed up, and that was Brian. Bob Uphughes, also from the Landmark, did participate as well. He does not live in Brookfield, however. So there was one resident that showed up. Is Brian, I don't need to summarize his comments. He did a very nice job under public forum tonight, setting up his, or summarizing his concerns with it. He's obviously not in favor of that. Of the widening, I also heard from one individual who sent me an email, Kathy Diskow. She lives in the condominium at the corner of Grand and Grant. Just to paraphrase from her email to me, she said, "We do not need or want additional vehicle or pedestrian traffic or the hassle of navigating into our parking lot during construction," was her comment. So she did not participate in the meeting, but she did provide that email. As I said at the meeting last week, and I'll say it now, we're not looking at this for today. As I said at the board meeting 3 weeks ago, I think everyone's goal, and it ties in with the left, but Cindy's economic development plan, I think we'd all like to see some improvements on some additional businesses on Grand Boulevard, perhaps a planned and natural outgrowth of downtown. As I said 3 weeks ago, one of the areas where downtown could expand to is towards Grant Avenue. As we get into the presentation, there are some properties along Grant, on the south side of Grant, that are probably ripe for redevelopment and might redevelop. And so what villages do is you think prospectively, and you think, what can we do to set ourselves up for future success? The easy thing to do is to do what, just repeat what's out there. Brian did raise a valid point. We talked to staff. We did not, last 3 weeks ago, actually count North Avenue. We didn't take into consideration the fact that the north side of Grant is no parking. Actually, in my mind, now that if we did the expansion, the fact that, as Derek will say, I think we could add 22 parking spaces if we were to widen the street. And it just, to me, I know that's not Brian's point, but it provides a further rationale, and it doesn't change my recommendation. I'll let Derek speak for himself of the recommendation to go forward with this. I understand change is hard. I understand that nobody wants to lose green space. Brian brought that up both last week and tonight, and believe me, we don't want to either. I think Trustee Kaluzny said, or one of you said, if we take down 20 trees, let's put back 30 trees. I agree completely, and that's what we would do. We would add trees. Will those new trees at the beginning be as big as the trees that we're taking out now? Of course not. It takes a long time, and as Brian said, it takes decades for trees to grow. But nevertheless, I have not changed my recommendation, and that is to think prospectively, to think long-term. Brian did raise a concern at the meeting. I want to dispel this. But if we did this, are we somehow suggesting that downtown and commercial buildings would spread to the north side of Grant Avenue? That is not possible under the current zoning. Everything on the north side of Grant is single-family zoning. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. The south side is not single-family zoning. The south side of Grant is commercial, mixed-use, high-density zoning, which if it comes, and we've had one building already built there, a multifamily building, and it is our hope that this economic development plan is going to flourish and is going to prosper, and that we'll have more. If we do that, I would hate to say that we've made a decision today that in 5, 6, 7 years from now looked like, oh, we lost out on this opportunity, because again, we're not going to be coming back to Grant Avenue, I would doubt, for another 30 or 40 years. So because of those reasons, I understand the challenges, I understand the angst, but that is a summary of the meeting that we had. I will now shut up and let the village engineer provide his analysis.
Thank you, Tim. What I'd like to do, so as Brian and Tim pointed out, we weren't aware of the no parking on the north side when we presented the options before. Like to go through the different options as the current layout would be. Is currently the pavement is 22 foot wide. What does that leave? That gives you a 7-foot parking lane on the south and one 15-foot shared through lane. So it's wider, but it's still, with cars, it's either very tight or you look for 11-foot through lanes. So it's not possible for cars to have two-way traffic. I guess I'll rephrase. It's possible, but it's very tight. Cars are typically 6 foot wide. It's very tight with the existing condition. 2 weeks ago, we presented an option, option A, that was 1.5 foot of widening on each side. That would provide you with one 7-foot parking lane and an 18-foot shared through lane. Again, that's two 9-foot lanes. It's still substandard. I don't think that's necessarily an option that the village would consider with the current parking layout there. The reason we had suggested that is if you had parking north and south, it would result in one 11-foot shared through lane. The option that the third option, option B, is what's shown. Yeah, and can we go to the other one, Emily? Yeah, thank you. And what that results in is we have two 11-foot through lanes. They're dedicated through lanes. And we have two 7-foot parking lanes on each side. And this is what staff is recommending. The benefits of this widening: it provides an additional 20 parking spaces on the north side of Grant, results in two 11-foot wide dedicated through lanes, which will result in improved safety for traffic flow, as they're not having to pull over and weave in and out when two cars are passing. And we did look at a tree planting program. We're taking down 17 trees. As Tim mentioned, they are mature trees. We propose planting 23 new trees, and they'd be at a more uniform spacing. On the south side, there's a whole block with no trees. The new trees would be at a uniform spacing. So an increase of 6 new trees. I don't think I'm gonna go through all the cost was $80,000 with the new trees. It's $500 a tree at 23, so it's a total of $91,500 is our estimate of the increase in construction costs. And with that, I'd open it up to any questions from the board.
Questions or comments from the board?
So I wasn't at the last meeting. I did watch the video of it. The video recording is fantastic. But if you haven't watched our meetings, the audio portion is great. The video portion is great. And I know there was some discussion on the diagonal parking that we had ruled out. To the 1.5 foot width increase, I mean, it was kind of standard, I thought, that we were doing that on these streets, trying to get the standard width on them. I mean, we've done that all around town. We did that on Woodside, right by me, this last year, a couple years ago. Are you saying you don't think that's an option now because we don't have parking on the one side?
Right, so the rationale between the 1.5 foot increase is it takes you from 22 edge to edge to 25 foot edge to edge. So you have two 7-foot parking lanes, which together add up to 14 feet. That gives you the 11-foot shared through lane. Without having the parking on the north side, you don't have to widen. You already have a 15-foot shared through lane.
Okay, and then, I mean, going the full width, I'm trying to picture this in the neighborhood. I know we're trying to think forward on this and where things go. You know, you did mention we have a, you know, building that's a couple years old on Grant. It's most likely that's not going to be torn down and replaced anytime real soon. The width of this would be similar to Washington, wouldn't it?
It's similar to Prairie, Washington, no.
Okay, well,
Washington's
similar
a
to
different-
Washington, similar to Prairie, that's fine. I'm trying to picture this in what we have there now, in the neighborhoods we have there now. That's a big street. And Derek, you and I talked about this a little bit, in particular the area from Prairie to Forest. You know, I'm just not seeing that width of a street there, and if we're looking for parking there, we just seem so far off the business district. You know, we talked about not wanting the road to jog. Well, if you look at the design, it does anyhow. I mean, if we didn't do from Prairie to Forest, you know, what we have in the, do you have one of the other slides there?
We can go to Google Maps if you.
Well, no, the schematic, no, the
I think he's
schematic of
looking
how
for
it's,
that plan view.
yeah,
That's the
right
one, Tim.
there. So,
There you
I'm
go.
sorry, right.
so if you see, if Prairie to Forest was kept at the same, the bottom one, was kept at the same one, you wouldn't have a jog in the street, you just wouldn't have that extra parking lane on the side. You follow what I'm,
I don't, no. I'm not-
okay, well, you see how you, right on Prairie and a Grant, you have the, I don't know what you call them, and,
Yeah, the bump outs.
Right,
is a common
right.
term.
so if you continued on Prairie to Forest on that bump out where you didn't have that bump out, that curb line followed that arc across, the street doesn't jog any.
Right, it's the through lanes that we're concerned with jogging. I think the
Right, so
through
the
lanes.
through
line-
lanes wouldn't
line-
jog.
Looks like the through lanes would line up to me
Right.
on this option.
It's just, it's a big street we're putting in there. That's a lot of width, and I mean, picture the width of Prairie on those streets, and particularly from Prairie to Forest. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, it's true. It's, the width of Prairie is 36 feet because it has the exact same cross-section we're proposing on this street. So it is a wider street than most of our residential streets. Again, with meeting with staff, there's a desire to add some parking. This would be the proposed design to add some parking on that north side.
But more than the parking, aren't we designating Grant more of a major street, more of a through street? By this increased width and 2 lanes, that's not the kind of street we have there now. So parking, yes, we are increasing parking, but we're also changing that neighborhood and changing that whole area.
So Trustee Ketchner, if I could try and just to frame the issue, are you in support of the widening at all, or widening just the stretch to Prairie and then leaving?
Originally, I was in support of the 1.5 foot widening because I thought we were typically doing that. I understand that now. That gives us really nothing more.
Oh.
I don't know that I'm in support of widening it at 7 feet on each side anywhere, but particularly not from Prairie to Forest.
But Derek, would there be design issues or problems if, for instance, you widen the section from Grand to Prairie and left the section from Prairie to Forest as it is, or is there any point to widening that 1.5 feet, or?
So we could design it, if we didn't widen from Prairie to Forest, we could keep the through lanes as they're shown. We would, you could, yeah, if you don't want to widen it at all, there'd be either a little jog at the intersection. More likely what we would do is taper the center lines to line up so they fed into each other. So you'd be kind of crossing at a slight diagonal as you cross Prairie.
because I understand trustee Ketchmark's point. If you picture just the stretch that he's talking about from Prairie to Forest, if it's as wide as Prairie Avenue, and then that ends basically into Forest, which is very narrow with cars parked on both sides, it seems like you're going to have a, funnel effect where there's a lot of cars or a lot of traffic. It's very difficult to turn off of Grant onto north or southbound Forest as it is, just because the narrow and that street isn't wide and there's cars on both sides. Would you have the potential for too much traffic by almost creating or designated a thoroughfare, then dead-ending into a narrow side street with, T intersection?
Whereas if you ended at Prairie, you're kind of ending at a collector route each way. So you're ending at Prairie or at Grand, you have a major street there. But as you mentioned, President Garvey, I mean, ending up into Forest, we're putting 2 through lanes leading to Forest. Is that what we want? I mean, I'm not sure how that helps us with development in that area going forward, because it would seem Forest needs to be wider then too.
Well, I thank you for raising that point. Let's see, let's the rest of the board feel about that or hear about that, and how does the rest of the board feel about the overall issue, the widening? And if I could just interject, Derek, the idea to widen it under option B and add 22 spaces, obviously, there lesser parking, increase in lesser number of parking spaces is also an option where, I assume that's taking advantage of almost every available parking space on the north side. If there's, to go back to former trustee Oberhauser's point, not blocking alley and driveway access points by having cars parked immediately against them and stuff like this, there could be some lesser amount of parking, correct?
There could you go back to the exhibit you had? This is fine.
Sorry.
That's all right. If we look at design option B, I know it's a little small for you, but in the white, that's the striping. We always stay off of the alley returns. We set back the parking off of the alley returns. It's at least 10 feet. If you look at some of those, could you go a little to your east, Tim? You'll see some right there, right in the middle, the alley right there. You can see the driveways are also located, so the parking starts quite a bit. It's 20 to 25 feet off. So,
okay.
And that's you're familiar with that sort of design in town. That's what we've used on Maple Avenue, for instance, is all of the parking stops 10 feet from the alley returns. So I think you have adequate turning room to make that maneuver in and out of the alleys.
And the parking, as it get close, another side topic, which is also an important topic the board wants to address going forward, is the safety of the intersection. Grant as it intersects with Prairie, and possible design improvements or signage improvements or parking restrictions to improve that line of sight. And we've talked about everything from stop signs on Prairie and everything else. That's not necessarily part of this specific decision, but that is something the board is very interested in going forward to, decide, what to do there. But the parking on Grant right at Prairie is set back far enough where you're not contributing to the poor sight lines or anything, correct?
Yes, well, we're looking at the sight lines on Prairie. That was a note I have from the last meeting. I haven't finished, but I intend to give staff a report on that, or a letter, where you'd need to eliminate some of the parking on Prairie to allow you to see that oncoming traffic better.
And I guess that I kind of thought that might be the suggested solution or improvement, is to reduce parking on Prairie to improve the sight lines at that intersection, because I know the possible criteria for a stop sign at the intersection and else, but that's why personally, the idea of additional parking on Grant intrigued me, because you're going to be displacing some cars on Prairie, and if they are moved off of Prairie to improve the sight lines, to improve that intersection, maybe providing some additional parking by widening the street on the north end is a possible benefit of this project. So is the way I was looking at it. But I'm sorry, I wanted to kind of throw it out to the board a little bit, so.
I'm hesitant about the widening. I agree with trustee Ketchmark's points, especially on that east block. it doesn't seem to make sense to make it as wide as a collector route, especially in that area. And one hesitation that I have is that once it's widened, there's no going back. You never get that space back. So I really would like to get this right. And I'm not sure that it really is a necessary change yet. I understand that we want to plan for the future, but I'm not sure that I see the need for the widening in the parking yet.
And again, to that point, I mean, as I think Tim pointed, I mean, this street, it's 30, 40 years since it was improved, and when we do it right, it's 30 to 40 years at least, hopefully, before we improve it again. I mean, I'm not sure how long we anticipate the need might be going down the road. And again, I agree with the distinction east of Prairie to Forest might be treated differently than this, but I guess the point I just made a few minutes ago, I would like the board to maybe to think about that or consider that as an option. The original purpose of this committee item was not to address the problem of the intersection with Grant and Prairie, but there is a side note that that's probably going to become a part of this. And if you do eliminate, and I think everyone can see we need Derek, but I think you could see one of the ways you're going to have to improve that is eliminate parking spaces on Prairie, north and south of Grant, for quite a distance to improve the sight lines for people trying to cross Prairie at Grant or to turn north or south off Grant onto Prairie. So we're going to eliminate some parking on Prairie, which is already pretty heavily parked, and it's restricted south of Grant due to commuter and other restrictions. So I think if you want that solution of improving the sight lines and eliminate parking spaces on Prairie and don't provide any alternatives, you might be you're pushing a problem somewhere else or another way. So I want to throw that out there. That's a possible solution to the plan. So, but
I could add something to.
That could also be something that drives more of public support for this sort of widening.
The idea of moving the parking, clearing up the intersection, and possibly creating alternative parking.
Sure. I mean, all that would take would be some yellow paint to remove that parking. No.
Well, to remove the parking spaces on Prairie, but just then eliminate the spaces and not provide any additional alternatives when it's already heavily parked. We could ban, to make it very easy to go to the extreme, we could ban parking on Prairie for a block each way to make it wide open, but then where does that parking go or what alternatives you provide? I'm saying by the possibility of considering widening the stretch of Grant from Prairie to Grand and providing some additional parking farther away from the intersection, you're providing some relief from the spaces that might be limited on Prairie to clear up what's a very pressing problem, I think. So I'm not sure if I'm making my point clear enough. I think you have to we should provide some solution other than just taking away parking spaces on Prairie. And I think that's why possibly adding spaces of parking by widening on Grant might be part of a bigger solution.
What I was going to add is to address a little bit of what Trustee Hendricks brought up was, so part of the reason we brought this to the village is that this street is actually the original concrete pavement that was installed with the subdivision. I don't know exactly when this was built, but it's more than 30 or 40 years. It's probably 80 to 100 years old. It's the original curbs. Curbs need replacement. Now's the time to consider this. We don't want to spend all the money to replace these curbs, and then 5, 10, not even 15, 20. We'd like to not come back and spend that money. So that's why we just wanted to offer as at least the board to consider it. And of course, we brought it to staff first, and Tim and Emily were on board, a little excited about it because of the additional parking in the business area. So, but fully understanding the impact to the parkways and the residential neighborhood. So,
Well, I think in addition, there's a speed aspect to this. Anytime you widen a road, it gives a visual cue that you can drive faster. And I think that we can't ignore that aspect of this as well.
Is there a requirement that it has to, a through lane has to be 11 feet? Is that like law, or?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
A through lane has to be 11 feet? It has to be, or?
Doesn't have to be, that's the IDOT and ASHTO standards are 11.
Mhm.
They actually want 12 foot if you can get it, but almost nobody, even on Prairie and Maple, we don't have that. But
Well, I was
just the
thinking, if you kept the parking on the north side, and you still widen it to 25 feet, that's not enough to have 2 through lanes still, correct?
Not IDOT standards for an 11-foot lane, will 2 cars pass
You
at
have
the
to-
same
you have to-
time
you're gonna
at
have to have
some point?
29
I
to
think
30
they
feet
will, it's
instead,
just
yeah.
tight.
But that would eliminate speeding as well a little bit. But the, I do tend to, I'd hate to pass up the opportunity to expand this, but I do understand, I also agree with trustee Ketchmark about from Prairie to Grand as far as to collector route to collector route. I don't know what the foreseeable future of Forest is, so expanding that down there, that wide, that would cause problems, I think. I agree with his assessment of that. I would hate to, I think now is the opportunity to expand. I would hate to bypass that and then have to readdress this in 15 years for whatever board's up here. I think expanding is still the right way to go, even if you were to just put the parking on the north side and keep it on the north side and expand it to 30 feet or 29 feet in this case, right? It would be, and then you would still not be touching the south side curb cuts, right? I mean, you're gonna have to replace the curbs, but you won't be taking out the trees on the south side of, the north side of that street if you kept all the parking on the, north or south? If you kept the parking on one side of the street, you wouldn't be touching the trees on the other side, correct? If you didn't
Put
do
in
parking on
2
both sides.
11-foot lanes.
Two
and just
11-foot
one
lanes and one
7-foot
7-foot parking lane, keeping it on the same side, you wouldn't be taking out all those trees.
No, I'd have to, so that 29 is 7-foot total widening, 3.5 foot on each side. I'd have to look really close if it impacts some trees, but it doesn't impact all of the trees.
Right, 'cause
know that.
I would hate to destroy all the trees in there, even if we're gonna plant them come later. But at the same time, I think it would behoove us to actually take advantage of this opportunity now to expand that road. And if we don't do it now, we're gonna regret that in 10 to 15 years, because we're not planning this for 2024, we're planning this for what's it gonna be in 2035, 2040. And we should expand this, even if we were to keep the parking on one side, that's fine, but having a through lane, and to trustee Ketchmark's point, from collector to collector. That's,
The only thing with that, trustee Cote, is we don't get the additional parking then.
no, I
As part of the
understand, we're not
reason.
getting the additional parking, but we're at least gonna have a better through lane for that point right there, which does get used.
I tend to agree with trustee Cote. To Brian's point about the parking on the north, there isn't now. Maybe you could add it in the future, but having the easier through way and keeping the parking on the south side and allowing more traffic flow, keeping the trees, I'd be more in favor of that. I think a 36-foot wide road like a collector route is too much for the character of that neighborhood, and I know it's an opportunity, and I just can't get my head around that, sorry.
I have an issue just with the stormwater mitigation, because, these rain events continue to get larger and more frequent, and you add that much concrete, that's a massive amount of water going into your sewer system at once. And I think we need to, follow the same mitigation measures that we impose upon our residents, that, we have to take that into account. We can't just disregard that impact. Although, the parking, we're gonna have a 17-unit building that's gonna be opening up sometime this year, I imagine, and there's currently no overnight parking still on Grand.
Derek, can you maybe address the stormwater management portion of it? The concern of the trustees that former trustee Oberhauser brought up by taking out green grass and widening the curb, that you'll be contributing to excess water flow into the sewers? And what standards do we hold ourselves to versus what we hold the residents to?
So it is going to add additional runoff because we have additional impervious area, although after it, and I didn't think of it when you asked at the last meeting, but this section of Grant is actually served by storm sewers from Grand all the way to the alley between Prairie and Forest. So it still results in some additional runoff. Adding it to the storm sewer, those are designed for a larger storm than the old combined sewers. And the adding water to the combined sewers is particularly bad in the fact that we get the house services are connected to the combined sewers. So not only, you're not risking just street flooding, but you could get basement flooding. So, and I did mention...
I'm sorry, Chuck and Brian, if you could go out, we could pick you up here, and it's just kind of hard to hear. Thank you. Sorry, Derek.
And I did mention, we do put 4-inch restrictors on there to slow the water down compared to what's going in now. There's 8-inch pipes. That's about a quarter of the rate of the flow, even though the pipe's half the size, the area is 1/4 of what the 8-inch pipes that are on there now. So it is true in that half block between Forest and Prairie that drains down towards Forest, that would be going into the combined sewer system. It's a larger widening, on our 1.5-foot widening, we haven't ever provided below ground storage. That's how you could mitigate it. The MWRD has their watershed management ordinance does require storage when you exceed a certain threshold. We're well below that threshold where we would need it. But to your point, there's additional water, particularly in the combined sewer for the 125 feet roughly from Forest running west to that first alley.
But would it be that much of an increase to add the underwater storage? I mean, underground storage?
I don't have a number prepared. I'm not sure.
Understood.
But just to clarify, if a private developer was looking to build something that expanded the parkway, are we requiring less of us than what we would require of them?
Not on a parkway, but on their private developments. Yeah, when you increase your impervious area or just redevelop it. It's a little out of context, guys. It's much less common. All of the regulatory agencies recognize that when you make widening on street pavements, it's sometimes very difficult to provide that additional storage there just based on the total volume of the street that you, improvements that you do. It's much more common on private properties to provide restrictors and stormwater storage.
And Derek, if I could help try and maybe move towards trying to build a consensus. If a majority of the board, or a clear majority of the board, was not in favor of expanding or widening Grant east of Prairie to Forest, would that in any way change your recommendation from a design standpoint about what you would recommend from Grand to Prairie? Can you widen Grand and Prairie under option B and not have a design nightmare if you don't do Grant from Prairie to Forest?
You can. I'd have to look at the transition there at Prairie. What we do would be slightly different than what we have, and just picture it as center line, trying to get those center lines to line up better.
And is there any thought to changing, I mean, the designation, it's two-way that way east at any point. I mean, is there any thought of not allowing cars to go east across Prairie from Grant across the Forest and just making a one-way coming out of that neighborhood? Is that a possible solution or anything like that? Or just even separate from this project, because that's one of the most dangerous things to do, is to try and cross Prairie going from, Grant to Forest. I mean, some people do that to get to a village board meeting faster and things like this, when the bridge was open.
Back in the day.
But I mean, is that, I mean, I guess I'm throwing out there today, but if there is it almost seems like there's a clear consensus from the board that they're not interested in widening grant east of Prairie to Forest.
Right.
And so that doesn't change in any way, create a design nightmare for the rest of it. And then, and I think I think I've got a clear consensus of the board that there is really no interest in widening grant east of Prairie. Is that correct?
That's for me.
Okay. Now, back to the issue of widening or not widening the other stretch and the additional parking, I guess that's where I'm trying to figure out where, I don't know that we have a clear consensus from the board.
I'm still in favor of doing like 29 feet where you don't have to touch one side without affecting the trees, and then you can still have parking on the other side and have 2 through lanes.
You bring up the one-way. I'm not sure there's any interest on the board's part, but if you made a grant one-way the entire length, it changes the traffic flow, of course, but then you can widen by 1.5 feet and have parking on the north and the south side, and have the 11-foot through lane, and it's not a shared through lane because you have one-way traffic.
But, I mean, what direction would you make grant one way at that point?
Yeah, I don't want to,
And that
there's a lot of streets tying in, we'd have to get the police involved, but
Yeah, that would be a major neighborhood change and things like that with flows and everything else like this. I just, in terms of, I understand trustee Cote's, reluctance to, save trees. We all want to save the trees. I'm just not sure moving it from one side to the north side to the south side, what's the benefit of widening anything at that point? And we just kind of stick with maybe it's going back to just leaving it the way it was.
No, I'm saying you can have 2 through lanes at appropriate sizes and have 7-foot parking on one side. That's what I'm saying. You're not having a shared through lane, you're having 2 separate through lanes and 7-foot parking, just on one side. So instead of looking at 30-plus feet, you're only looking at 29.
But just leave the parking on the south side then, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And then you would make the parkway smaller on the more business district side of the street as opposed to the
Right.
residential side of the street.
And not affect the trees.
But I guess,
on that side.
back to a very basic point and why we're discussing this, why are we looking to widen it? Is it for parking? And if it is for parking, maybe that's kind of an ancillary issue here where, I thought we were trying to push parking along the tracks here for the business districts, gaining 14, what would we have on the one side, 14 spots? North side parking?
From Grand to Prairie, you'd have 13 new spots on the north.
Okay, so,
That's what we're asking.
what are those 13 spots for? Is that for the Grand Boulevard Business District? Is that for future development
Yes.
here? Is that the
Yeah,
thinking?
I think that's what staff's point was.
What we've been talking about is, like, you look at development patterns, and here's a new development's happening here. This property looks like it could be ripe for redevelopment. This whole area could be ripe for redevelopment. I'm not saying there's anybody on the docket right now that's looking for that, but these are the kind of properties in suburbs that long ago got redeveloped. You don't find, even this is an older multifamily building here. As I understand it, somebody had told me at the meeting, this property did come before the board several years ago for redevelopment, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure if it was turned down. I'm not sure if they were going to just
Is that the
renovate.
corner?
This is now that it's a real estate building.
We approved it, didn't we?
Building.
We approved it. Was he trying to convert it to condos or something after? But that was a single level building.
I don't know what happened, but this is ripe for, redevelopment could happen here, redevelopment could happen here, redevelopment could happen in this whole block here. That's what's happened in suburbs all around us. Hasn't happened much here, but that's where development would happen. And so you're right that I wouldn't anticipate this parking here being necessarily all that attractive to go to Burger Annex, which if I had the map, it would be down here. But anticipating what's going to happen to these properties over the next 20, 30, 40 years, this is where you're going to see redevelopment happening. I understand the argument that right now, you're right. We've got plenty of parking on Brookfield Avenue to serve Grand Boulevard. But I hear all the time of the parking crunches existing on Grand Boulevard. Well, then if that was the case, and for whatever reason people don't want to park down Brookfield Avenue, this does become more attractive if you want to go to Paisans, or you want to go to some of the northern businesses, but under the current configuration, there's very limited things we can do.
But without increasing the parking, I mean, just having 2 through lanes there, what is that doing for us?
I guess that was the point I was trying to bring up in response to the possible suggestions, just widening it to have 2 through lanes, because the reason this was targeted through staff, and I think you brought up the issue properly, is that we're not doing this for this year or 5 years, 6 years. That's an area we've targeted and is possible. That south side of the street is targeted for multifamily, higher density development, and when it comes forward, we will be saying, well, how are you going to provide parking, where are you going to provide parking, and things like this. So I think we have to have the foresight to look and say, okay, we're changing the design of the street now to say, okay, you might not need the parking now, but you might need it going forward. And again, going back to the killing 2 birds with 1 stone, if you're trying to improve the intersection, I still suggest that if you're taking away parking on Prairie to improve the sightlines, you've got to provide some alternative parking, as opposed, you can't push it farther south. You could never get a spot south of on Prairie, south of Grant to the tracks at any time of the day or night, and so you're going to push it farther north. You know, the cars that you're taking away to improve those sightlines, I think you have to look at this as an opportunity to add parking. Yes, you will lose some trees, and we're replacing the trees plus trees. I think that's getting back to the original point of the recommendation from staff and Derek, was the foresight to see this as a area that's going to be developed in the future. And, you know, the mistakes that this and other boards made in the past is not looking far enough ahead is, okay, we don't want to do this now because we don't want to take down trees or widen the parkway, but 5 years, 6 years, 7 years from now, if we have some developments come into those lots that we're going to be talking about, how do they provide more parking?
And what has changed is this area here is now in a TIF district, which is the board created and 2 years ago did for the intention. But now we have an avenue and we have an ability to incentivize development where the village never had that before. And so that will eventually at some point in time incentivize new development to happen that probably would not have happened absent the TIF, which is a whole argument for a TIF district.
But also, in order to develop the area, you're going to have 2 through lanes. You don't want to have a shared lane.
Exactly right.
You want 2 through lanes.
So if this becomes, let's just say this building gets torn down, this becomes a 4-story, I don't know what's permitted per zoning, but let's say there's 30 units here, you're gonna have a lot more traffic now. Forget about the parking, you're gonna have a lot more traffic on Grant. And if it's the zigzaggy thing that is going on now, it's just not conducive to.
No, you won't even attract the development if you don't have the right flow of traffic.
It could be a ceiling on what you'd be able to do on properties like
You
that.
have to have 2 through lanes there.
I'm wondering if we take away parking on Prairie, you know, who's parking in those spots now? You know, they're single-family homes. You would think, you know, the first house on the corner actually fronts Grant. So you have the couple houses after that, they're parking in front of their house. Are they gonna park around the corner on Grant? I mean, they'll park in their garage or.
Well, ideally they would, but I mean, if they don't have any other option, I mean, I mean, I know everyone's familiar, it's a tightly parked block.
Right.
And if you're eliminating 2, 3 spaces, 2 spaces on each side, that's 4 cars that are there all the time now, and just providing some, ideally, yes, if it was that simple, we would just, you know, tell everyone to park in their garage.
Well, really, it's the west side you'd be taking them away from, right? So, I mean, I'm picture trying to make that turn, you know, or go across Prairie, so you can't see to your left, you can't see north on Prairie. I mean, you wouldn't take them away on the east side, right?
Going from the east to the west across Prairie is also a problem.
Where would we take them away from there, though? On the east side, southeast
corner.
Yeah.
So
Right.
Well,
the
myself,
northwest and
when
the
I have a problem there,
southeast.
there's always a mail truck parked on the northeast corner. And I can't see the cars coming from the north. So I think it's every part of that corner.
Why would we just make it a 4-way stop?
We don't have the power.
Prairie's a collector. You need to meet you should meet warrants on all your stop signs, but particularly on collector routes. Anytime we use federal funding, we have to show them the warrants for stop signs. And I don't think you have the traffic on Grant right now to meet that warrant.
Can I throw out a 100th scenario? What if you leave the one side of parking now, increase for the 2 lanes, and if we have developments come in that require more parking, you make it a one-way later and add parking on the north side as well?
I don't know that making that a one-way at any point, if you have development that you're gonna wanna make that one-way, because which way, when Derek threw it out there sort of gingerly, which way would you make it one-way? Do you wanna funnel traffic towards Grand Boulevard or towards Prairie?
I don't know, but there's plenty of one-ways around there, so it wouldn't be unusual.
I'm envisioning the businesses would not want it to be one way towards Prairie. They're gonna wanna be able to bring traffic on Prairie over to that end of the business district. If you ever shut that down during the summer, we'd have to consider that too, like when you had the bands out this summer. You'd have to look at how people would get to the, south end of the 3700 block of Grand.
What happens going forward, Derek? You leave it the way it is. Somewhere 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, you have something where we would need that. What happens there?
We leave it at the same width now. Plan on replacing that old curb. If you widen it to what we show on option B, you'd remove all the curb, you'd do all the parkway improvements, your driveways, alley returns and whatnot. You'd come in and put the curb in the widened position. You'd put some sort of a base course to pavement, so you could construct a new 7-foot wide pavement. You'd probably overlay the whole.
So, but we're not rebuilding that whole street, right? We're not reconstructing it. There's concrete there now. So that's being milled down.
It is, but I will tell you, you have to look at grading when you start doing widening like this. Like our estimate of cost is assuming a reconstruct on this because of the grading. So I don't know for sure that you'd be able to make it work in the future with the grades of that concrete base right there. So you may be looking at reconstructing the road at that time.
I think if you think leaving it the way it is, you're hamstringing and just saying, we don't want future development in that area on the south side of the street, which is what we've zoned it for. I think you're sending a message to anyone that, I think that could be part of the reason people haven't looked at it, been serious about it, but it's like, if then we gotta look at changing the zoning on that side. I really don't think leaving it as it is an option, and taking the incremental step of doing it a little bit, but not enough to create what, the original plan was. I think you're doing a similar thing. I understand the board's reluctance to take down trees and do everything else. I think the widening and the issues about speed and other things can be addressed, and the parking, which spaces are parked and where, I think those are things that can be addressed, but we wouldn't do this 3 blocks north of Grant right now. But this is right on the border of, the area that we've talked about and spent the most time talking about development on. Trustee Conroy brought up in our original goal setting sessions that this is the hottest area and it's the biggest area. If we have to be willing to take these steps. If you remember the concerns of the people on Grant, west of Grand Boulevard along Sunnyside, when the new building that we approved, new apartment, they talked about how difficult it is to park over there and that they can't park and everything else. I think we have to, and we have I don't mean to keep beating a dead horse. If you guys want to clear up that problem on Prairie, you got to provide some, we got to do that going forward quickly and take some steps to, change parking, change, site zones. And I think you got to offer some alternative parkings. I think this option B provides us a lot of different solutions. And, ultimately, yes, they're not going to be the mature trees right away, but they're going to be new trees, and it's going to be designed right, it's going to look right, and we've set ourselves up for the future. It solves the zoning, it solves the planning issues, it solves the safety issues in terms of that intersection. So I guess I'm looking to what kind of, we need to move forward with this somehow. And we don't have trustee Leclerc here, we can get his input going forward. But, I mean, I think it's clear, don't expand it east of Forest. I guess put up, I mean, is the board okay with putting up option B up for a vote? And then what is the other alternative? If someone could frame the other alternative, I mean, I guess the option, everyone could just vote it down if they want to leave things the way they are. But what other option do you want besides option B, knowing that we're not going to expand it east of Prairie?
My idea was 29 feet, one side, 7-foot parking. 2 through lanes with one side parking. That was my alternative.
Okay.
I think that's a good secondary option, because then you're putting the parking on the south side where the commercial multifamily development would be. The single-family residential would remain no parking and alleviate potential issues with parking on that side.
And if we're not going to expand east of Prairie, the cost associated to putting in a underground reservoir.
Well, I mean, I don't really think that's an option that we have factored into cost or anything else like this, but.
No, it could be factored in though, because if we're not doing a widening of the rest of the road, that you're saving out on that. It might be just enough to cover water mitigation on the other side.
But Derek, without putting you on the spot, are we talking hundreds of thousands of dollars?
I don't think so. I would suggest to you with the, if you're gonna limit the widening to Prairie to Grand, that ties to a storm sewer. Our storm sewers have sufficient capacity. Again, all sewers can get surcharged, we can get street flooding, but
So you're saying you don't need to do it?
I
Okay.
wouldn't spend the money on that, yeah.
Okay.
But it just, so I'm clear, under trustee Cote's option, are we adding any parking spaces?
No.
But you are
because
getting the throughput.
Again, parking's happening on the south side of the street, and then it would just continue.
Right, and again, I just want to frame the issues so if you go with the option, trustee Cote's option, you're widening it, you're doing it, but you're not adding any spaces, which I believe ignores the potential attracting future development that I thought a lot of the board agreed was an issue. You're not adding that, and making that development more likely or more attractive, and you're not providing any relief if we do.
But you are making it somewhat attractive by doubling up the throughput. Because right now it's a shared, and as a shared lane, you're never gonna get any attraction there because there's no throughput. Nobody wants to build by a shared lane, but if you do dual lanes, at least you're gonna have that throughput there. And if the parking's on the other side.
But does a developer, and Emily, does a developer care that there's through lanes so the traffic moves faster if parking isn't really, added parking's not really an option, is it?
In my opinion, it's a more modern street development pattern. So that is always more attractive.
They have parking or just?
To have two through lanes on a two-way street, yeah.
But without adding parking, if we don't add any parking, do you see us being able to develop those lots that we've talked about on the south side?
Of course, there would be other development options. Is it more attractive with parking? Yes. Developers always are looking for ways to avoid having parking on their site. But that doesn't mean that it would not be developed without that.
So why don't we put up so option B and C for Cote, option C for Cote? Option, and both of them include not widening east of Prairie, and then on a side note, come up with the other recommendations for how we treat the intersection of Prairie and Grant. Okay?
Derek, are the curbs replaced either way? So if we're not, again, in a simple way, if we weren't doing anything, would we still have, if we weren't widening, would we still replace the curbs?
We would.
Okay, so east of Prairie, we're still replacing those curbs.
That's correct.
And west of Prairie, we would still replace the south side curb even if we weren't moving it. Just so I'm clear on that.
Correct, yes.
Or the north side curb. The north side curb we would replace, because the south side would be where it'd be widened.
And to add to that,
Correct.
just to be clear, from Prairie to Forest, we are doing it that 1.5 feet on either side to get to the 25-foot normal street that we have everywhere else. We're just not doing the 7-foot.
That's a good point.
I just want to be clear that we're not
Is that what the
doing
board?
nothing at all on the other side. We're just doing not as wide.
Wasn't the original reason for the 25 feet for emergency vehicles, et cetera?
Right.
It was, and here, the fact that you have that no parking gives the emergency vehicles enough room, and when we talk about the widening, that's when we set it up in our pavement evaluation report, it was really set up for streets that had frontage on both sides, because they get much more parking. So we haven't widened all of the streets like Garfield, Jackson, you know, some of our side streets, east-west streets. So we have left them, and the reason being because typically we have a lot less parking on those streets. Now, you could consider it in this area if you have a lot of parking, like it seems like there's more traffic and parking. This is right on the edge of what makes this unique and different from some of the other residential streets is this is right on the edge of a business district. So we do, again, I don't have a traffic study, but it seemed like trustees agreed too. We've seen that there's additional traffic on this street than just the residents that live on these streets.
So to
It's a
Trustee
little more
Kaluzny's
cut-through.
point or question, is the plan to widen Grant from Prairie to Forest 1.5 feet on each side, or just leave it as it is?
Yeah, we've changed everything. The plan was to widen it by the 1.5 feet, yes. At this point, yeah.
Is there a reason we wouldn't want to do that still, if we're taking the curbs out anyway, or?
You know, when we were widening, if you have the no parking on the north side, then I don't see a great benefit to widening 1.5 feet.
Okay.
You're going, it's a little wider substandard lane, but there's still substandard lanes. People have to pull over to if you want two-way traffic, you're gonna either pull over or have very.
So you could add some spaces parking spaces on Grant between Forest and Prairie, and possibly, is that the same restriction there? There's no parking on the north side?
That's correct.
Okay. So does the board want to add 1.5 feet on each side of Grant from Prairie to Forest, or leave it as it is and just replace the curves? Is that those are the main choices?
On that section, yes.
Okay, so what does the board want to do there?
I don't know what adding the 3 feet does for us there. I mean,
Just to frame it, it's one 15-foot lane now.
Right.
Add 3 feet, you have one 18-foot lane. That's, when cars pass, they have 9 foot each to pass. Standards are 11.
so it seems either way, we're substandard with it for that. Other than maybe it's easier zigzagging around with the extra 3 feet.
And I think your emergency vehicles have enough room with the 15-foot lane as is, and your snowplows have enough room with the 15-foot.
So I'm fine with leaving it that way.
Anybody else? I mean, I mean, Trustee Cote says okay, leaving it as is. I'm trying to frame potential ordinances here. So does anyone want to expand it 1.5 feet each side, or just leave it as it is and just improve the existing curves?
I mean, I feel like it made sense to widen it because I thought the rest of the streets were all getting widened to 25. So if that's not standard and there's no need to do it, then I don't care either way, to be honest. I'm not a street pass-through expert, so I will trust your judgment on that. But that's why I would ask the question. If we were doing all of them 25, I just wondered why we wouldn't here.
Understood. Yeah, but not the side streets. Just lesser parking on them.
Derek, what's your recommendation on that stretch? Kind of knowing what the board's thinking, I mean, do you think we need to widen? Is there any real benefit to widening it to 3 feet?
I don't see it, as long as we're keeping the no parking on the north side, then
Okay.
I don't see a benefit to justify the cost of the widening.
Okay, so in framing the potential ordinances, leave it as it is. Prairie from Forest to Grant, grant from Prairie to Forest, leave the existing with, that's on all potential ordinances, and option B and option C. And then give everyone a chance to think about it, talk about it, and get some more feedback. But we got to put this up because we got to put it out to bid is the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, all right, let's put this up in 2 weeks then. Okay? And just because Derek told me that he didn't get his wife anything for Valentine's Day and the stores are closing, we're going to address item 6 real quick.
You're
Is there-
welcome, Derek.
Nobody's waiting up. It's okay. Got all night.
So the 2022 Cook County Block Development Grant application.
You bet. Try to be a little brief with this. So we, every year, Cook County has a call for projects, grant application for the Community Development Block Program. And what that essentially does is provides funding to residents that are either live in low to moderate income areas or residents that are presumed low to moderate income, such as like a handicapped resident is presumed low to moderate income. We have one area in town, Emily, do we have the attachment with the map?
I don't think I can,
No.
does this
Okay.
map work for you?
Could.
No.
I can pull up the zoning,
It was part of,
No,
well, the
it's-
attachment to the packet had the CDBG
Yeah,
eligible
I think it
areas.
was in the board pack, but regardless, we have one area, I know the limits, it's, the one area that we have, to be considered a low to moderate income area, which means you can do capital improvements in that area, and those are eligible for Cook County funding. It's bounded by, the railroad tracks on the north, from Everly to Madison, and it goes as far south as, Rochester. So it's the same area that we had last year. For the last 5 to 10 years, what we typically apply for is some sort of a capital project. We've looked at roadways, we've avoided the alleys because of our special assessment program. It would lead to some inequities in funding, so we've focused on roadways. Those roadways south of Ogden are all rated a 3, which are, those are the streets we're doing now. They're next on the list. We evaluated them last year. We applied for Blanchard. We did not get funding. It's not because it's a bad application or it's a bad roadway. We are, quote unquote, a little more affluent. We have less low to moderate income areas than the communities that get funding every year. So I think that's still a good project. We'd recommend it. We've received funding for our roadway projects. We had some for Elm Avenue a few years ago. Got some funding for Jackson 4 or 5 years ago. And we had funding for the parking lot that got constructed by the commuter station just this last year. So I think we have a reasonable chance of getting funding. I'll go quickly through my letter. Scope of work is very similar to what we've done on other streets, 1.5 feet with widening. It has frontage on both sides. We're recommending we apply for Blanchard Avenue from Rochester to Ogden. Our estimate of construction costs is $392,600. With engineering, total cost of the project is $458,400. Schedule for the grant is it's due in March, the application. They announced the projects either late summer, early fall of this year, 22. If we were selected to get funding, we would use that funding towards construction in 23. Assuming we're gonna have a road program, we may try to lump it in with that road program, so we get a little economy of scale when we go out to bid.
All right, so the consensus we're looking forward is to go through, we have Hancock do the grant application, and we see the financial impact is the $1,000 approximate cost of the, that, so,
I'm in favor.
Me too.
okay. You don't have to do it tonight, Derek, but get it done.
I think we should talk about this a little bit more.
Should we have a public meeting and invite Blanchard Avenue residents?
Yes.
Let's, this time we'll get it, we'll, let's put it through this time, and, okay. All right, Derek, thank you very much. The last item is discussion of a text amendment to revise uses related to massage. Emily?
Yes,
Thank
thank you. Let me find where we are in the PowerPoints. Okay. As President Garvey mentioned, this is a proposed text amendment for several sections of the code as it relates to the use for massage establishments. First of all, this slide shows what is currently allowed. Massage establishments are included within the use of an office, medical, dental, or health practitioner. The map on the right shows that pretty much all of the commercial districts allow that type of office use by right. This is an example of what would be changed in one of the sections of the zoning district. This is the use table. So not only would we pull out the massage establishment from that section of the office land use category and make a separate line item shown there in red, but then also the recommendation is to change that from permitted by right to something that would require a special use permit. Now, this was reviewed at a public hearing on January 27th, 2020. There were no members of the public in attendance for this. The Planning and Zoning Commission had a lot of discussion on this in regards to the definition, the use table that I just described, but also the requirements for a special use permit in general. And the concept was to see how a special use permit like this could be something that would offer an extra layer of review and an extra way to regulate this kind of business. I want to point out that in one of the ordinances here tonight that the Planning and Zoning Commission did not see, it really, in my opinion, I think the village attorney did a great job bringing in those discussion points from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the regulations that's within the essentially business license and massage license establishment. So a lot of those comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission were taken into consideration, but in a different section of the zoning code through that separate ordinance. And ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission did vote unanimously to recommend approval of this request. That is all I have.
Okay. Just one question. How does the state-issued license play into this?
The state issue licenses for massage therapy and massage therapists. We are regulating the establishments. So this has nothing to do with the practice of massage, the art of massage, this license that you get from the state, and only the state could regulate. This would regulate just the establishment. Emily did a good job summarizing the two-prong approach, where the first prong is know who's coming into your town through the zoning process. They have to request a special use. And the second prong is how to continue to monitor these businesses, these establishments from a business license point, which we briefly discussed a couple committee of the wholes ago about an ability to inspect the place, know who's applying, get a roster of who's applying, have certain conditions placed on the business where they're subject to lose their business license if they violate a new enumerated business license provision of the code. As you all may know, it's easier to revoke a business license than it is to revoke a special use permit. But we find that having to overcome an initial hurdle might weed out some bad actors, and then having an actual thorough business license regulation is specific for massage establishments would furthermore weed out bad actors who might not want to go through all those hoops if they're not a bona fide massage establishment.
So just because or even though they would have a state license, we can turn them down for this?
The license is for the art of massage, the therapists. We are just regulating the establishments.
Okay.
Can I ask when, I know there were some sections about grandfathered in, I'm sorry, my computer died, it's out of batteries, but it might have been in there, about whether the grandfathered in massage establishments, when they have to renew their business license, or they have to renew with the village? Is that an opportunity, or is that something that we can't do anything about?
No, for the zoning issue, they're gonna be grandfathered in. If they don't have a special use, they don't have to get a special use for existing businesses. New ones that come in have to abide by the special use procedure in the zoning code. For the business license, there will be a time where even existing businesses are caught up to be on the same playing field as businesses coming in.
But Emily, did we determine, is the other one even open? The one's completely closed, that store is vacant. The, it used to be Amethyst, it's Sun Massage or something was assigned, they never got their license? or-
They, as of today, they are not, but I know that they did process their application and did get approval for their business license inspection for the physical space, so.
Okay.
I know that, as far as the conversation from the Plan Commission goes, Commissioner Benjamin pointed out, I think, an important consideration, and that's that these bad actors can become human trafficking problems. So a lot of the discussion at the Plan Commission meeting was items that the zoning code can't address. I think that here, the municipal code and the business license change is addressing a lot of the recommendations that the plan commissioners had. Displaying the license, inspections at any time, limiting the hours of operation, I think is very important, and making sure that there's not on-site cooking facilities that are troublesome. And one thing it didn't address is, I think, lodging of people on site overnight. That was a concern, and I'm not sure I saw that in the municipal code. But either way, I think that I appreciate the work of staff and the attorney to really incorporate all of this. It's being taken seriously, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Trustee Hendricks. I will revisit the business license to see how that interplays with the zoning, where we prohibit mixed use of residential. I thought it could be covered that way, but maybe it could go one step further to expressly prohibit lodging. I will review that for the board agenda item next time.
Thank you. One other item, the Plan Commission did discuss amending the process, I think, to get a special use permit, and had interest in making sure that applicants had a, what was it? Build-out plans when they applied, and that was desired. I think that they didn't want to hold this up from being approved and sent forward, so that hopefully that'll still be in our future.
Yes, that's an issue that I will work with Emily on. It's not specific or limited to massage establishments. It's a broader change to requiring certain universal steps for all people seeking a special use.
Yeah.
I'm happy to work with Emily on that.
So there seems to be a consensus from the board supporting the recommendations of staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Can we get the appropriate ordinance by the 28th?
I just got to change the date and add lodging.
Okay. All right, thank you for all the work on this, and the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff. This is, as when we first started talking about this, we're doing what we can within our business license and our zoning code. This could be also, we could be assisted if the county and state would do their job at a different level, but we can, as I say often, we got to do what we can, and maybe other government bodies will become more responsible going forward. So we'll deal with the issues with the tools that we have and the creativity of staff and the legal advice of our counsel, and we'll accomplish what we can. So, all right, so we'll put this up on the 28th. All right, that ends the items we have up for discussion. Before we have executive session, is there any public comment? Okay, hearing no public comment, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session for a discussion regarding pending litigation pursuant to Section 2C11 of the Open Meetings Act.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Trustee Cote, second by Trustee Kaluzny. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Conroy?
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Aye.
Motion's yes.
Okay, we're adjourned into executive session at 10:06 PM. Let's try and get right into this.
We gotta stay in here?
Yes.
Yeah.